Welcome everybody to today's webinar with Jane Kim. Thanks for joining us. Today's really special. We're celebrating the 5th anniversary of the landmark Wall of Birds mural at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And my name's Lisa Kopp. I'm on the visitor center team at the lab. And I'll be talking with Jane today. But before we dive into our conversation with Jane, I wanted to make a couple of quick announcements. So before we get started, I wanted to make sure everyone knew that we had closed captioning available. So if you'd like to see subtitles, click on the captions button at the bottom of your screen. And we have a couple of questions that we've teed up for Jane, but we also really want to hear questions from you all. So if you click on the Q&A button that's located at the bottom of your screen on Zoom and type questions into the Q&A window, we'll be monitoring that. And the best way to get your questions answered is to upvote other people's questions that are similar to yours. And that way we'll really prioritize those questions. And some questions we'll be answering in conversation with Jane. Other questions will be answered with our staff who's assisting with the Q&A. So look in the answered column to see if there's a question that's been answered in that area. Please only use the Zoom chat for tech support or to share information. We aren't going to be monitoring it for questions, but if you want to use the chat, please make sure to change the to field from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. And we have colleagues who are behind the scenes responding to the Zoom Q&A and chat if you have, again, tech questions on the chat or questions for Jane in the Q&A. And then last thing is that we're also streaming to Facebook. So if you're watching on the Cornell Labs Facebook page, hello. And you can add your questions to the comments on Facebook. And again, our team is monitoring those and we'll do our best to get them answered. But also please be aware that there have been some spam attempts on Facebook. So do not click on any links that might pop up there unless they're posted by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology official Facebook page owner. So I think that that's everything that I need to run through. And now we can get into the good stuff. So Jane, welcome. We're so excited to have you here.
Hi. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm very excited to speak with everybody. Hi, world.
So just to get started, could you give us a little bit of background on who you are, both, you know, as an artist, as a person, for people who might not be as familiar?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share so that we can follow along with some slides that I have prepared. There we go. So my name is Jane Kim, and I am an artist and a scientific illustrator. I started Inkdwell, which is an art studio that highlights the wonders of the natural world. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design and years later decided to get a degree in scientific illustration, and now have spent the last 8 years now to do what I do today. And the Wall of Birds was really sort of the beginning of that journey. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you today. But a little bit more about me. This is me. I was maybe about 3 years old in this picture, but I'm sharing this because it really does sort of say everything about maybe who I am today too, or at least the foundational parts of who I am. And at that time, I had this probably plus year long love affair with bears. And I know many of you who know me already know this aspect of my personality, but I was truly obsessed. I had maybe over 300 teddy bears in my collection. And at a certain point when I had the dexterity in my fingers and the skills to make my own, I had a subscription to Teddy Bear Review, and in it they had these patterns of how to make your own teddy bear. So the picture on the right is one of my very first attempts at making a teddy bear, and it was all hand sewn. But what's really funny is this next picture. So just take a note of what I'm wearing and the facial expression, and I think that's really funny today. I'm still in my coveralls and I am still making work about animals. And this has truly been an inspiration of mine since the day I can remember. So that's me in a nutshell. And today now I get to do this professionally, which I can't believe is still my life.
That's great. That's such a fun story. So I hadn't heard that story, and I've gotten to have a conversation with you before. We had you at the lab a few years ago, and we got to work together when you were working on the mural. And that's going to be what the focus of our conversation will be for this next chunk of time. So before we launch into some more questions, I wanted to give everyone on the Zoom a little bit of background on the Wall of Birds, which is your massive, massive mural that's located at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology Visitor Center here in Ithaca, New York. It's formally titled "From So Simple a Beginning," which is a quote from Darwin's Origin of Species, but we affectionately refer to it as the Wall of Birds, and that's the title of your book, and I think that that's how most people refer to it. And for people at home who haven't been to the lab here in Ithaca, it truly is massive. It was originally a 2,500, well, it still is a 2,500 square foot wall. At the time that you started, it was blank. And then you took years to add 270 life-size animals in, exacting detail. 243 of those are representatives of the families of birds, which was the number circa 2015, right?
Yes, exactly.
That continues to change.
You ornithologists keep adding more.
Right? So it's a snapshot of where we were in 2015. And then an additional 27 extinct species, which represent the evolutionary history of birds. And it's stunning. And we're really fortunate to be able to show people on this Zoom, the mural, using the Bird Academy Wall of Birds Interactive. So we'll share the link to that in the chat. And Jane will also be showing us that as she talks through things a bit. So be sure to take some time after Jane's talk to explore that incredible interactive further, because it really does allow you to get a special view of Jane's work. So
I might add that I still think that is maybe one of the most special features of this mural that has not been duplicated in any other one of my works, and I value that so much, and I'm just so thrilled that it exists.
That's wonderful. So just to sort of backtrack a little bit, the story of how the Wall of Birds came to be is really fun. I love hearing how it went, both the inspiration and the process that you went through to make it happen. So could you, share a little bit about how this came to be?
I would love to. For those of you who actually do have my book, I'm not going to read this particular passage, but Fitz, who is a director of the lab, was kind enough to write the foreword to the book, and he actually does describe his recount, and which is of course accurate to my own, of how this project really sort of came to be. So if you do have the book, you can read about that on page 13, but I'm going to go ahead and just give you a nutshell version of that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. So in 2011, I was, let's see, there we go. I was fortunate enough to be selected as one of the Bartels science illustrators. And so I was able to spend about 5 months at the lab. And during that time, I sort of had this dream project in my mind when I was in school studying scientific illustration, and it was called the Migrating Mural. And basically, in a nutshell, it's a series of public art installations painted along migration corridors of wildlife and that they share with people. And, I was still in the process of trying to figure out how I was going to make that project a reality. And there was a National Geographic ocean conservation sort of reader's choice competition that I decided to enter my migrating mural project idea to. And it hadn't even been a thing. I had barely just begun to create mock-ups and sketches to try to, you know, push this out into the world. But you know, Diane, who at the time was the director of the Bartels program, sent it around the lab, and honestly, I think that I had a lot of support there, and just a lot of people in my life who really supported what I did and my vision. My project ended up winning, which was very unexpected and very cool. And one of the, I guess, outcomes of that was a blog that was written about the project, and she sent that around the lab. So I think that's how Fitz was able to learn that I was interested in murals. And so he brought me out to this landing platform, which is the second floor hallway that connects the visitor center to the upstairs offices. And he just sort of presented this wall to me. And at the time it was a different color. It was kind of an olive green color, if you can even imagine that, for those of you who are at the lab now, to have an olive green visitor center. But that was the color. And he said, ever since this building was created, I have always wanted a mural that depicts the evolution of birds. And would you like to do this? And I honestly couldn't believe my ears. I basically leapt up and just wanted to leap off the building, or leap off that balcony in joy. And I think that enthusiasm was really what captured Fitz, and thought, okay, this is the person who is going to do this for us. And you know, I'd never taken on anything that massive, and I hadn't even started the migrating mural. So really the next thing was to get some more experience under my belt. And so in doing that, and here is, you can actually even look up this National Geographic blog. So a year later, finally, I was able to launch the migrating mural off of Kickstarter, and it became a reality. And so this is just a little update article about this project and where I was going to start. And the very first mural for the migrating mural ended up being about the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep at the Mount Williamson Motel in Independence, California. So this is just a really rough mock-up of what I intended to do. And that October/November, the first migrating mural was born. And so it was, I kind of see these two projects tied hand in hand, because on the one hand, you know, this idea of even doing these sort of public conservation murals was how I was connected to the wall of birds, and vice versa. And this gave me some practice and maybe a little bit of confidence to do the wall of birds from that point.
Great. So if you're ready to, Jane, we can look a little bit at the mural.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to head over to the Bird Academy website to look at the interactive, which is really fantastic, because as we were saying, it allows for so many people who can't make it to Ithaca to experience Jane's work right now. With the visitor center closed, it allows for us all to appreciate it virtually. And you know, it's really an incredible interactive, because it shows the scale as Jane's demonstrating right now, but then it also allows you to zoom up so close that you can see individual brush strokes in some of the birds.
I didn't realize it was going to be that close. So that is a little bit, it was a little uncomfortable when I looked it up.
And, you know, and actually this is a better view than you can get in the building, because it's such a huge scale. And some of these are so high up that you have to use binoculars if you're gonna get this good of a view. But then if you click on an individual species, there's a whole bunch of additional information that you can explore. There's a description of that bird. There's information about why it was chosen as a representative for the family. You can listen to a sound from the Macaulay Library, which is one of the lab's really incredible collections of natural history, sounds and images and videos. And then you can look at a map that shows where this bird is located using eBird sightings data. So, and then there's a fun voting feature that you can decide, you can, you know, pick what your favorite bird is, which I can't actually remember right now which one is the top one. but this information is available for every species that's there on the wall. So Jane is going to talk to us about a couple of species that she feels, particularly connected to as she drives us around the mural a little bit.
Yeah, okay, so I did think about this long and hard because it is hard to just narrow in on a couple. Oh, and just in case for those of you who are wondering why it is so blank right here, there are two giant architectural support beams that cross-sect this wall right here. So there isn't a lot of space for birds, but it does tell an interesting story about the diversity of birds and where a lot of them can be found. So I thought that was kind of an interesting one, but that question does often get asked. I'm actually going to move to where I began, which was down in Australasia. And I was thinking of, just trying to recall the memory of painting each bird, which ones gave me anxiety, which was, God, I think 90% of them. And then which ones sort of felt enjoyable and memorable as that. And I have to say, the magpie goose was one that I really loved painting. And I don't know what it was. It's just got this ancient look to it. And I think they're pretty common, and maybe they're like the equivalent of a Canada goose in, I don't know, in Australia. So they don't really get too much attention. Oh, see, no votes. I'm going to go ahead and vote for it and say that I love it. I don't know, but I just loved painting just the stark contrast of the black and the white markings, and sort of creating volume in a simply marked bird. And I just loved painting this one. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to the magpie goose, and also because this is when I was really still trying to figure out what my technique was, and how to do this quickly and efficiently. And I think I felt like I sort of had a bit of a breakthrough with that magpie goose. So that was one of the ones that I wanted to call out. I do have a fun story about the shoebill. I think all of us really love the shoebill, in that it's just such a weird bird. It's the only representative of its family. It's that unique of a bird. But there were some birds that most of the time I would paint it, move on, and that would be that. And I had to just complete it and let done be done. But every now and again, and of course, if I had another year to do this to all the birds, I probably would make some sort of small edit here and there as my eye becomes more keen, and I feel more confident. And there's certainly there's always room for improvement. But I did end up editing the shoebill, and it was after a very fun memory, a personal memory of the shoebill, which I'm going to just switch over back to my slide here. And this is my husband and me on New Year's Eve. And he was so sweet. His name is Thayer Walker. He's actually also the co-founder of Inktwell and the co-author of the Wall of Birds book. He's a brilliant journalist and writer. But he was very sweet. Of course, I was under such a deadline to get this done by December of 2015 that I was really working like pretty much 7 days a week for 12 to 15 hours a day. And so for New Year's Eve, and I thought, well, I can't take a break. I got to keep pushing through. He sat with me in the lift in that entire evening. And I think I can admit this now. I would never admitted it before because I didn't want to get in trouble with OSHA, or New York's equivalent of OSHA. But we did have a little whiskey cheer at the mark of the new year of 2015. But you can see, back to the original story, I digress, the shoebill, in this particular version, there's a much steeper swoop in the bill. And when I saw this picture, I looked at that and went, oh, that doesn't really feel right. And sometimes it takes a picture of the painting to see some of your errors. And so I went back, and if switch back. So take a note of that arc. I did go back to the shoe bill and make it much more straight. And I was so much happier about that. And sometimes when you make just those small adjustments, you're just like, that's what was wrong with it. And you don't always know. So that's a fun story. And then I'm going to end at the common loon because we have something special for this bird later that I'll mention later. It is definitely one of my favorite birds and my favorite paintings on the wall, and its call is probably in my top 5 bird calls. So yeah.
Mine too. I have fond memories of hearing loons while camping as a kid.
Actually, the first time I heard a loon in the wild was while I was working on the mural. I visited some of my husband's family up in Maine, and we stayed on a little pond called Panther Pond, and I was greeted with loon calls at night and in the morning. It was awesome.
Special.
Yeah.
Well, sort of related to some of your favorite birds on the wall, we have a question from someone watching that asked if you were a bird watcher or a bird lover yourself, and have you seen any of the birds that are on the mural in the wild?
This is a great question. Yes, I love watching birds. You know, I have a hard time saying I'm a birder because knowing birders, I don't have the same level of sort of daily practice as I think birders really do. So, but you know, when I was a Bartels intern, I would go out as much as I can. And when we go on vacations, that's certainly one of our main ecotourism highlights is to go birding with experts. So I definitely love going with people who are far more knowledgeable and better at it than I am. Yeah,
I feel like
and I have seen, I would say a good majority of the ones in North America. There have been some special ones when in our travels, you know, we went to New Zealand, and I saw the saddleback. I saw not the great kiwi, but I did see a brown kiwi. I did not see a kakapo, but I did get to see some New Zealand birds, which was pretty phenomenal. So yeah, I look forward to, on, you know, my own checklist is definitely ones that I have painted, and I look forward to doing more of that when we can travel again.
right.
Yeah.
So I mentioned a little bit that we had you back at the lab in 2018 to celebrate the release of your book, Wall of Birds, which is beautiful, and another way for people to connect with this, with the mural at home. And we can share in the chat ways that people can, where people can find the book. And you talked about how that was, you know, sort of a whole undertaking in and of itself. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the book and how that was sort of a continuation of the process in, you know, in finishing the mural and working through what it meant to have finished the mural.
Yeah, I think I was in such tunnel vision work mode when I was creating the work that I didn't really have much time to process. You know, I just had this spreadsheet of birds that I had to complete. And when I got back home, you know, I think I just needed to be in this sort of state of hibernation for a few months. I didn't do anything. I just needed to like rest my brain and my mind and my body. So getting back into the book, it forced me to try to pull in deep and find those memories and think about what this project meant to me. So it was, you know, it's quite cathartic to be able to really understand that the work that I was doing there was so much deeper to me personally than just fulfilling a mural on a wall. You know, the stories that I learned about the birds and bringing that into social commentary, into, you know, understanding why I make what I make, and what I want to continue to output in the world, and how that really guided projects that were meaningful to me, and that it set the tone. So I think that exploring that was really fabulous. I have some a passage that I'd love to read to you guys, and I do have it. I can pull it up on the screen so that So you guys can read along if you choose to. I think you should be able to see it. But so a lot of the stories, there were some stories where we made, social allegory and commentary. There were ones that were really purely about the painting process. There were some stories that were just fun memories of the wall. So, this book was really such a mix. And there was one review of the book in the LA Times, I think, and they didn't know how to position the book. It wasn't necessarily art book. It wasn't necessarily a natural history book. So they didn't really know what it was. But I think this particular passage is a good example of the spirit of some of the stories that were shared about the characters. And of course, the blue-footed booby is a favorite. And I'm calling this one out in particular because there is something special in the celebration of our 5-year anniversary that I'll be sharing at the end of this as well. So here's the blue-footed booby. The blue-footed booby's choreography is not meant to make the birds work hard, but to flaunt their success at hard work. Boobies produce a pastel blue pigment in their feet with the help of carotenoids absorbed from their piscivorous diet. The brighter the feet, the better fed and healthier the booby. Their amorous dance is a means to show off those vibrant paddles, the color of a tropical Caribbean seascape, or a 7-Eleven Slurpee. The 270 creatures on the wall cover a Myers-Briggs workshop of personality types. From the curious Suriyama to the cautious Patu, the booby provided an irresistible opportunity to celebrate the state of silliness. In the air and at sea, there are magnificent shapeshifters, broad-winged bombers that start their aerial dives from 100 feet high, then fold into a spear to plunge 80 feet deep after baitfish. Such grace escapes the bird on land, where it's easy to see why the booby derives its name from the Spanish word for foolish. While many bird species use dance to display strength or agility, the booby's jig is a slow and awkward two-step. So this sequence to the right is not in the book, but I wanted to share what their dance steps are. After all, by the time they reach the courtship phase, the hard work is presumably over. The feet are already blue. I relish the opportunity to capture such a majestic hunter in its goofy routine. Its left foot is lifted as if presenting its bright blue webbing like a prize. The booby is shifting from side to side, and it appears as if it might even tip over. I wanted to maintain a hint of the bird's inherent grace, so I captured its upper body in a streamlined position, its head thrown back and beak pointed toward the sky like an arrow. Its right wing just barely poking out behind its left foot adds depth to the painting, prompting the viewer to consider the booby's unseen anatomy. The booby represents an important lesson. Sometimes we humans can take ourselves too seriously. We forget to have fun. The booby reminds us that every so often, it's okay to look silly on the dance floor. So yeah, I just love watching these videos, and I am happy to report that this is a bird that I have seen in the wild, and it was in a place that I did not expect to see it. I thought they were sort of solely found in the Galapagos, but we were in Baja, Mexico, and in La Paz, and there was a little rock that had blue-footed boobies. I was stunned. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that comes to be so clear hearing you write about, these species is that you did get to know them so intimately. And so one of the questions that someone has submitted is, what's your inspiration for your artwork? So I'm curious if is it from learning about the birds and sort of understanding their personality, or is it, attempting to portray them as accurate and scientifically as possible, or, obviously a balance of the two? And, what's sort of where do you start for that inspiration?
I think that's a great question. And for me, I think the story and the narrative is something that really drives me first and foremost. But then beyond that, I love to capture and depict the animals as they truly are and would be seen. And that was a really fun evolution in the mural as well. And there is a passage in the book that reflects on that. When Jesse Berry was the scientific advisor that I worked with primarily on this project, as well as with Fitz. But when I had first started sketching out the birds, I had them all sort of on the ground, standing. because I knew that I wasn't going to be including an environment or any other sort of background. And so I was thinking of a field guide sort of approach to the book. But as she was reviewing the sketches, a lot of her feedback was like, well, this bird wouldn't really do this. It wouldn't really stand flat on the ground like that. We would never observe it like that. And I recall thinking, oh, well, then let's not do that. And we, sort of both realized that it was important to show the birds in a natural position, regardless of whether there was an environment painted or not. And so I think that for me, that element of accuracy, or just kind of, I think nature is amazing on its own, and someone like myself isn't going to make it any better. I mean, I can only hope to do it justice, in my work. And so that's really important to me. So when I can combine, but the part that I can be interpretive on are the stories and how, our perception of it as humanity is something that I can add value to. So I think that that is an important cross section. Is I love depicting nature as is, but then understanding how its relevance influences our own understanding of the world as people.
That's great. Well, and actually one of our other questions that someone has gotten a couple votes on too is what did you learn personally as you worked on this project? So you're talking about how we view the birds, but what did the birds do to you as you were
Oh yeah, I
this?
mean, I think that's just it. I mean, oftentimes, like when watching videos, and not to say that I was anthropomorphizing them at all, but I was certainly, there were a lot of stories in this book too about, for example, I have a passage on feminism and what we can learn about the relationship of gender, or I guess sex. Really, gender is a human term, but sex between in the avian world, and how the amazing plumage that we see on male birds was because the females have selected the most showy and best birds to mate with. And so that just fed into what we see today, and that beauty was determined by females. And so there was a passage on how to connect the idea of female self-determination in this book too. So there were a lot of biological and scientific lessons that I sort of apply to my own understanding of the world.
That's great. So you mentioned at your talk a few years back that one sort of distinct memory that you had while working was being at the lab late at night when no one was there. You didn't have visitors and staff coming and watching you work. But we have at the lab a microphone out in our feeder garden that pipes sounds into the building. And you talked about listening to the night sounds of sapsucker woods in the pond, which I've never gotten to do, actually. It sounds like it would be really wonderful. But are there any other memories or, sort of moments that stand out now that you're 5 years out from having completed it?
Yes, well, I want to share, let's see, go back to a sequence of, I had so many people involved in the mural, including photographers who would come and document, and friends who would come and visit, Thayer, who would come in the lift with me. And I have a very special memory of a friend. And at the time, that was really the only way that I felt like I could engage with people, is if they were willing to come to me during that period of time. It was just so insane. And I have a dear friend, her name is Jennifer Campbell Smith, and she's a wonderful photographer, birder, hawker, brilliant human. And she said, Jane, I want to watch you paint a bird from start to finish. And I said, okay. I mean, if you want to do that, I work really late and I work really long. So, but please, by all means, if you are wanting to do this, let's do this. And so she did. And she sat with me in the lift the entire time that I painted this Andean flamingo. And so here it is in its underpainting stage. And, I saw in going back through, that's another thing that the book did. Like I had to review all these photos and timestamps and just sort of recall how long things took. But, we were probably at the lab at around noon, which is typical for me to show up at that time to get some daylight hours in. And then I would work through the night until, sometimes 3 or 4 in the morning. And so those sounds were so helpful in that I didn't feel alone while I was working in the lab. I had my outdoor wildlife friends. But this night I had company and it was really fun. She's also a gifted artist herself. And so she brought her paints and painted a hummingbird in the lift as she sort of documented and so the flamingo is probably the most well documented of all the birds that I have on the wall. And so, here I am. And it was from about 1 p.m. till about 4 a.m. that she stayed with me, capturing. And every couple of hours I would come out back onto that platform balcony and stare at the progress and determine what else needed to be done. And so I recall this moment looking at this and thinking, man, I have to change something. And what I ended up changing was the position of that back leg. I completely painted that out. And so now this is like 3:30 in the morning and we both called it quits. And I said, we got as far as we could, but this was about nearly 15 hours straight of painting. And then I changed that back leg from just barely lifted to being completely tucked and in a sort of standing, resting position. So that was a really fun memory, but it was also really great to reflect and have this documentation of start to finish.
Well, and actually, that picture that you just showed of yourself up on the balcony looking from a distance relates to a question that someone asked, which is, how did you address having to have a subject look, perfect because you had a building full of ornithologists watching what you were doing up close, but then also, have it look detailed from a distance as well. So, someone asked, how did you tweak the way you painted to make things easily and correctly viewed from afar?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. I do actually have a chapter in the book that addresses just that. And it was when I was painting the cassowary, I spent like 6 hours just lovingly painting the face of the cassowary. And when I came up here to look at it, it didn't look like I had done anything on the wall. And I thought, oh, shoot, I am going to have to figure out how to really exaggerate and paint boldly and graphically to make these birds stand out. And at the time, the interactive wasn't, part of the picture yet. So I didn't realize that people would be able to zoom in on these birds. But so I was really just painting it based on how one would be able to view it. And so I think that, when you look at these birds up close, they're kind of like if if you have basic Photoshop or photo editing skills, it's like I kicked up the brightness and contrast on each of these birds just enough so that they held up from a distance. But that's how I did it. I would stand up at the balcony, look at the wall from afar, and then come back up into my lift and make adjustments there.
That's great. We have a couple sort of logistics questions related to how you managed to do this at the scale. And one is, you've mentioned the lift a couple of times. So do you want to talk a little bit about your setup, sort of extreme? I remember hearing the beeping from my office as you were going up and down.
Okay. Yes, I am so grateful to everybody at the lab. And honestly, part of the reason why I didn't start until, later in the day was because I didn't want my lift to be super disruptive. I didn't move a lot, but even whenever I moved up and down. So there were 3 different setups that we had. We had a an articulating boom lift, it's also called a cherry picker. And so that was for me to reach above the stairwell in that very top left corner. I also used primarily a scissor lift, and that got me through, I would say 3/4 of the wall I was able to reach from a scissor lift. And then at another point on the stair itself, we had to set up scaffolding. So those are my 3 sort of major logistical setups.
And that probably isn't foreign to you, working at large scales and doing murals.
Okay. Yes. So the one thing you will learn about me, and I think Fitz does mention. Okay, I'm just going to read just this one little line. So Fitz says, if Jane never gulped at all on grasping the magnitude of this endeavor, she never let on. Rather, she approached the project with enthusiasm, conviction, and copious hard work. And I just remember reading that line and starting to cry, because it really was that. I mean, I feel like everything that I do is kind of an experiment and a first time thing. And I'm just like, I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to do it. So the very first training I ever had on this kind of equipment was at the lab. So I had never used any of it before this project. And of course, now I use it a lot in my work, but it was the first time. And I felt very cool getting this card that had like a certification of completing training on this equipment. It was neat.
Well, and another question that someone asked is, you talked about the Migrating Murals series that sort of was coming to be in tandem with the start of the work of the Wall of Birds. Did you, and this is related to another question that I had written about sort of your career trajectory since the mural, but did you always envision yourself working at this scale when you sort of went down the path of scientific illustration?
No, definitely not. I for a couple of years, and I moved to San Francisco after graduating, and a couple of years before I went back to school for scientific illustration, I was working at a interior decorative finishing company, and we were working on interior murals and decorative works for in that company. And I remember really loving that scale and the impact and the importance that what embellishing the room or a wall or architecture has, in terms of messaging and importance that individual has, shares. So I think that certainly influenced that concept of the migrating mural, but it was really more that I wanted to figure out a way to engage easily with the general public, that wasn't in a gallery setting or a museum setting or even a textbook setting. It was like, well, how can I just have this be a fabric of our environment? And so as I would do these long drives from Monterey to San Francisco, which is where the scientific illustration program was, I would look across at the billboards and think, gosh, it would be so much cooler if these billboards had information about, the natural environment that I'm currently driving through. How much more informative and beautiful would that be? And so then this idea started to formulate, and it was really more, again, based on the story. Like I said, the story really drives not only the medium, but the how my approach is for any particular project.
It's fascinating. Well, and do you want to talk a little bit about, how you feel like this project ended up changing sort of your path afterwards? I mean, I remember that the response to this project being completed was, overwhelming. And we still, back when the visitor center was open, we would get people who would come in specifically to see the Wall of Birds. They had heard about it or seen pictures, and they wanted to, see it in person in themselves. So
that means the world to me, because that is really one of the reasons why I do it, is the accessibility and the just the access, the public access. I'd love to share a little bit about what I'm doing now and what I did immediately after. The Wall of Birds is by far going to stand out as one of the most important projects in my life, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But I would love to have another opportunity to do something like I did for the Lab of Ornithology, but I just don't even really think that opportunity necessarily exists. You know, the representing, you know, one member of every family of a group of animals. You know, birds are really perfect for that. It's not too many and it's not too few. So it's sort of this sweet spot where it can actually, you know, be done in a doable time frame. But you know, it really set the tone in terms of the monumental quality, which is something that I strive for now. It set the tone for, you know, scientific accuracy and storytelling, and then, you know, beauty, you know, and monument. So I think that I carried that through in the rest of my work, and I'd love to share that with you all. So the migrating mural, it you know, started with the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep, and there were 6 murals, and it was regional. You know, it was a very specific location in the Eastern Sierra of California, from on Highway 395 from Lone Pine to Lee Vining, which is only, you know, about 125-mile stretch. So when we created the migrating mural, you know, there was always a vision for it to represent a variety of migrating species. And so we started with land, and I wanted to do sky and sea as like the first 3 species. So we're currently on the 2nd species, which is a sky migrator. And, you know, it was very difficult to land on, you know, what animal to do. There's so many birds and bats even that could fall into this category. But ultimately we landed on the monarch butterfly because it had such a large geographic range. You know, it connects pretty much all the lower 48, including Canada and Mexico. So that is a pretty spectacular way to think about unity of the country, is through this one animal. So we started the project on an airport control tower, which I thought was really great. And this piece is called Kaleidoscope, and it's in Springdale, Arkansas. So this is their airport. And Kaleidoscope is actually what a group of butterflies is called. So that's, and then we moved, that was in 2017. Yeah, 2017. So that's when the Monarch Butterfly campaign began. This is in 2018, and it's at Full Sail University in Winter Park. This was a collaboration with the Nature Conservancy. And this piece is called Milkweed Galaxy. And then just in the neighboring town of Orlando, Florida, we created this piece in their downtown right across from Civic Center. This is called Midnight Dream, also 2018.
So beautiful.
This is, thank you. This is a close-up of one called Monarch in Moda, and this is in Ogden, Utah. And here's the rest of the mural. And that wall, it's a parking lot to a arts center, an arts building, and it's like maybe, I don't know, 200 feet long down. And I had a lot of fun with this. In Ogden, we actually had 3 unique installations, and it was all centered around this cool collaboration of Weber State University's art department, this 9 Rails creative district in downtown Ogden, and the Ogden Nature Center. So I wanted to tell this cross-section story of natural history and art history. And so I sort of chose 3 different movements of art that we could apply this story to. And of course, you know, in the 60s, there's the op art movement, and man, how perfect are those spots on an adult monarch to tell that story. This was at Weber State and in their art department lobby. And of course, being a science illustrator, I really just wanted to highlight the beauty of scientific illustration. And these are Wasatch, which is the mountain range in Ogden, the wildflowers there, and bringing in the story that, you know, I think, you know, of course, when we think of monarchs, we think of milkweed, but the adult butterflies really need a variety of nectar flowers. So I just wanted to make sure to include that element of the story. This was called Generations. This piece is in San Francisco, so it was quite special honor to be able to produce 2 migrating murals in San Francisco where I live. This is called Five Families. And, because I was home, it was, of course, logistically a lot easier to tell or to produce these pieces. And I decided to expand the story from just the monarch to also include other butterfly species. And this is called Five Families. And then our latest monarch migrating mural is in downtown in the Tenderloin. And this I feel like kind of captures the same spirit of the Wall of Birds, in that, it wasn't just this one wall, but it was really kind of a 360 inclusive experience. It was like real time. We did the space. We also had it wrapped to the front of the building, and then had another image on the third side of the building, which includes, again, the 5 families of butterflies that you can find in San Francisco. In addition to that, we actually created a hand-painted wall covering that then lined the interior of the entryway of that building, and it's it's a residential apartment building. So this was specially just for the residents, because you can't really necessarily see this from the street too well. And this includes all butterflies that can currently be observed today in San Francisco. And much like the spirit of using eBird, with the Wall of Birds, I used the tool iNaturalist to help me understand what was being seen currently as far as butterflies go in San Francisco. And then we adapted this image to then be used as a vinyl to cover the garage door of this building. And so the whole building is called a papillon, but each mural has its own title. So one monarch is the one on the monarch, and families is on this. I'm sorry, butterflies and poppies, which is named after a Van Gogh painting called Butterflies and Poppies. And so here are a couple of details of the hand-painted wall covering. Some of my favorite. This is a tortoiseshell butterfly. This is a California sister. And here's a little fiery skipper. So other ways that the Wall of Birds has influenced my work moving forward, I think that the magnitude of the project, of course, has bled out into other bird-related institutions or works. And the Leoki Woodson Art Museum in Wausau, Wisconsin, has, for the last 40 years, they in fact celebrated their 40th anniversary of a annual art exhibit called Birds and Art. And it is just phenomenal, the quality of work in these shows, and the painters and the artists. They invited me to be an artist in residence for a week, knowing my work because of the Wall of Birds. So that was a direct influence there. But I decided to create this piece. It's 9 by 12 feet. No, 7 by 9 feet. Oh gosh, I don't even remember the dimensions. It's fairly big, but it's of indigo buntings. This is a little the museum tag that accompanies the work. That I'll just read because I think they did such a fabulous job of describing this piece. Indigo buntings aren't really blue. Our eyes just tell us they are. Blue pigment doesn't exist in the avian world, yet most of us can name several bold blue birds like jays or macaws, whose feathers are actually shades of brown, black, and gray. The blue we see in the birds is the result of a structural color created by light waves interacting with the protein structures of feathers. Artist and scientific illustrator Jane Kim's painting, R.G. Bird, illustrates how light intensity changes the blue hue of an indigo bunting. This bird can appear turquoise in bright sunlight, yet reads dark, midnight blue in low light. How does the artist convey the intensity of light in the painting? Shadows cast by the birds as they fly across the white background indicate light intensity. The artist uses shadows to represent brighter and lower light, affecting the hue of the bird. Why RGB? RGB, red, green, blue, is the color model representing how the human eye responds to light and perceives color. RGB is also the color model used for digital screens and in graphic design. The color wheel in the painting represents the full spectrum of colors created by mixing different levels of red, green, or blue light. The artist chose a white background because when all colors of light mix together, they create white. So, you know, another thing that the Wall of Birds taught me was to work quickly and be inventive with how we can make this work. So the residency was only a week long. So obviously I was not going to be able to produce that painting in a week. So it was painted on a veneer roll that I just checked on my flight and brought with me, and we actually mounted it onto the panel. This is the back of house in the museum, and these pictures were, of course, courtesy of the Liaki Woodson Art Museum. And then there I was painting in the entryway on site, and got to interface with the public. And again, you know, that availability to for the public to access the work has always been greatly important to me. I'm also going to point out that it was November in the middle of Wisconsin, so it was quite cold. And by the end of my residency, I was outfitted in that. It was freezing in the museum. So that's just a couple pictures from that experience. And then one of our most recent projects was at the Moore Lab of Zoology in Los Angeles at Occidental College. And I got to tell a very cool story in this entire building. They were renovating their department. And it's, again, another sort of 360 complete story of various ecosystems of Southern California and how land and sea connect. And so here are a few shots from there, and, you know, going down to the second level. And so the building is divided between the Moore Lab of Zoology upstairs and the Vantuna Research Group downstairs, which is, you know, ocean related. And so when you come downstairs, you know, you're in this sort of kelp scene, and each wall represents a different ecosystem. So we've got the kelp, we've got the ocean, kind of deep ocean represented by the bathymetry map. And we've got the estuary scene, and then upstairs the chaparral and urban. And here's just a few close-ups of the work there. And I love maps, as you know, that has carried through from the Wall of Birds. But this one was my favorite wall. This is the chaparral wall. And another, I guess, aspect of this project that was reminiscent of Cornell's was the availability of, here's a California gnatcatcher, using specimens. And, you know, I hadn't had that since the Wall of Birds to really directly have, you know, these references right here and experts to advise me. And so I loved, you know, being back in that environment and setting. Here's a few other close-ups of the birds. I did get faster. You know, I think I painted nearly 40 species in this particular series of murals within a 7-week period. But I don't think I'm going to ever get any faster than where I am now. It sort of makes me wish I could almost repaint the Wall of Birds just now, like, it, you know, every decade or something, do it and see how if I've improved, which I'm hoping I have. Yeah.
Well, we've got just a couple minutes left, so I wanted to see what what's next and how people can connect with your work.
Absolutely.
And actually, I should say we can share in the chat a list of all of the locations where Jane's work can be seen in case you're nearby. So we can have someone put that in the chat.
Awesome. So excited. We have a lot of really great projects in the horizon. And of course, in the spirit of celebrating the 5-year anniversary, we have a few very special things. So if you recall the Monarch and Moda mural, we partnered with a really fabulous company called Les Mandeurs, and they've you know, artisanal handmade sneakers, we decided to create a monarch shoe, you know, which I think was a big success, and we did, you know, we're able to highlight the Xerxes Society as our conservation organization. But this spring, we are so excited to do a Wall of Birds shoe. And of course, what better bird to highlight on a shoe than the blue-footed booby? So we are very excited to share this 4-step dance sequence of the blue-footed booby mating on this shoe. And I didn't want to reveal the design yet, but that's coming up in the spring. So keep that bookmarked. And then in February, we're very much looking forward to creating a project in Houston for their bayou greenways. And there, you know, of course, there are these network of bayous in this heart of downtown Houston. And on this, one of the long retaining walls of this pathway, we're going to be highlighting migratory birds of Houston. And, you know, one of the things I really wanted to highlight was the different plumages that birds can have between the spring and the fall. And so that center sequence of birds is a mirror image of the same species, just in their different plumages. And then we've got, you know, migratory breeders on the left and winter species on the right. And we are starting this one, but we are still working on figuring it out. So when you stand on that pathway looking out into the city, you see this building, and behind you will be the you know, the long wall of the birds, migratory birds. And what I would really love is to do another sort of 360 storytelling of birds, resident birds of Houston. And so we've selected about 6 species that really are representative of the city, and we're hoping that we can figure out a way to fund that particular part of the project as well. So that's coming up. And then we've got a show in February coming up at a gallery in San Francisco called Palette. And this is one of the paintings included. It's called Seafood Medley, but it's an exploration of our relationship to food and nature, and food as nature. And then finally, in January, I am going to release 5 unique sort of special edition prints that are inspired by the Wall of Birds. So I'm actually using some of the birds that are on the wall to create prints. And here's the common loon, the wood duck. And of course, in the spirit of the Wall of Birds, they are going to be life-size. So here is an artist proof of the ostrich being printed at life size. And that's so you can follow along. You can go to our website and sign up for our newsletter. And we don't send very many. It's honestly only when we have important things to share. I think our last newsletter was a year ago, so you won't get inundated. But you will get an update with everything that I just described here. You know, you can email us at info@inkdwell.com if you would like to, you know, bring a migrating mural to your town, or want to figure out how to help create that county law library in Houston. And then we're of course on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at InkDwell.
Thank you, Jane. That was incredible. And thank you everybody for all the great questions. We had so many to get to. We didn't. Maybe we'll just bring Jane back and do a round 2. But we also have Jane's contact information there. And then if you have questions about anything else that we can answer at the lab, you can feel free to email us at cornellbirds@cornell.edu. And thank you again, Jane. This was just so wonderful to see you and to talk with you again, and to get to sort of vicariously live in the lab right now, and you know, get to hear more about that incredible mural that I miss seeing every day.
Oh, same. I miss seeing all of you guys too. Thank you so much for inviting me back.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't think this is the last of our conversations about the mural, just because it seems to be so important to all of us. So thank you again to you, Jane, and thank you everybody for joining in. And
thank you.
Yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Okay, look forward to it.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.